Okay, how you doing? This is NSCA Chapter 18. We're moving forward in our presentation series here, and we're talking about older population. And given how the older population is in terms of just sheer numbers getting bigger and bigger and bigger, it's in your best interest to learn how to work with this population and kind of understand some of the dynamics associated with working with elderly or at least older. And I have to state that, as we age, I'm hopefully not breaking any news to anybody, we have kind of this erosive process that happens where we perhaps can't do the same things we used to be able to do when we were younger. So in essence, what has to happen is, as a trainer, you have to understand there's some limitations that are built in with people who might be older or on the older side of the equation. Taking a look at just the overall population itself, these health issues, they kind of evolve over time. And the health issues themselves are usually driven by hypokinetic situations, meaning they're driven by the sheer fact that a person is not moving like they once used to. And so as we age, one of the greatest things that we can do is just get up and put our feet on the floor and keep moving all day long and put a little bit of stressor into the system to allow our bodies to adapt. Now, we have to kind of guide our elderly population to do this and kind of like be aware of just any kind of movement, whether it's Tai Chi, Pilates, yoga, walking, perhaps doing more higher end cardiovascular activity. But it's the concept of trying to offset the progressive loss of muscle, which is sarcopenia. And if you kind of think of the word osteopenia, where it's like a loss of bone mineral density, you look at sarcopenia, you have sarco, short for sarcomere, it's the loss of muscle mass. And so with the etymology on this ties in where what we're looking to do is slow two main processes that happen from hypokinetic situations, meaning a person just sits around all day doing nothing. We're trying to slow the progressive loss of muscle, sarcopenia, and we're trying to slow the progressive loss of bone mineral density, which is osteopenia. And for some adults, it's difficult to understand, but for some adults, they simply just have difficulty moving because of other orthopedic concerns. With resistance training, it helps just in terms of understanding what resistance training can be for an elderly person. It's the same kind of conversation we had for our adolescent group, where it could be body weight, it could be machines, it could be small apparatus, and eventually getting into free weights. So all of these help slow the process of both sarcopenia and osteopenia. So it's in our best interest to go ahead and implement in any number of different training programs. But what the book points out here is resistance training protocols that incorporate relatively heavy loads, about 80% of 1 RM, provide effective stimuli for both muscular development and bone development, to which I completely agree. But you have to understand that there's some days where your clients might come in and they might have greater aches and pains and soreness, and that might be if you will, workout inhibitor and doesn't allow them to push around as much weight as they normally could. So you kind of have to feel out some clients to get an understanding if they can push around that 80% or what their actual capacity for work is on any given day, because there is a little bit of a moving target with this, a lot like it was with our adolescent population. They describe this concept of creeping obesity. We kind of have this two compartment model in our body. And as we age, we lose some muscle mass, we gain some fat weight. We lose a little bit more muscle mass because we're sitting around doing nothing. And so we gain a little bit more weight. And what ends up happening in this two compartment model is you have individuals who have a morphologic, physiologic change in their body, where they end up just having this creeping obesity where they get heavier and heavier and heavier. And they get heavier and heavier and heavier because they're adding more and more adipose tissue or just overall fat tissue. And they end up losing more and more muscle. What you'd like to do is, of course, have them lose fat weight and add muscle. But that's the conversation you have to have with your client when you sit down with them. So a person comes into you and they're 50 years old, like the example to the right. They may look very much like this. They weigh 156, but their body weight is 156, excuse me, and their fat weight might be 74 pounds, and their muscle that they're carrying around is 30. Whereas when they were in their 20s, they weighed 30 pounds less. And when they weighed 30 pounds less, they had more muscle by 15 pounds and they had a lot less fat weight. So that creeping obesity that you see, as it kind of creeps from 23% to 32% to 40% to 47%, this is kind of the typical morphological change that you'll see in a person as they age. So you have to get your clients to kind of wrap themselves around and embrace the two compartment model so they can understand, what is what. And the way I like to describe this to my clients is this: when you look at your body, Mrs. Johnson, you weigh 126 pounds. The 126 pounds represents you. That's you as you're sitting here right now. If we take a look at the fat weight versus fat-free weight, and I usually talk in terms of fat-free weight, not just muscle weight, but I talk about all the stuff that kind of got them here. So if we look at like what got you to this point where you walked in the door and sat down, that's your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments, your bones, your organs. That's all the fat-free weight in your body. That's X. Now the fat weight, that's the weight that goes along for the ride. Here you are, it's 29 pounds. So basically you have 29 pounds of baggage that you're kind of carrying around with you. So in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, we want to keep the fat-free weight and we want to reduce the fat weight. We want to have less baggage for you to carry around. And most people can understand that and then kind of wrap themselves around that. For some individuals, like our 30-year-old person here, they're like, gosh, 44 pounds. I mean, how much is that? It's like, okay, Mrs. Johnson, we'll go out to the gym. Here's a 45-pound plate. Hold on to this 45-pound plate and give it a hug for a second. That's how much fat weight you're carrying around. So sometimes you have to give them an actual physical representation of what that looks like. When we start looking at the health benefits for resistance exercise, all these things on the list to the left, there's a whole bunch of them. Everything from increased muscle mass all the way through to reduced body fat, reduced risk of diabetes, reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, et cetera, et cetera. Great benefit in terms of mental and emotional health, ability to do physical activities of daily living better, and then just overall better function in the body. So what we're trying to do is look at this in terms of a value proposition to the person in front of us and provide them an example of like, here's why you'll feel better, here's why you'll live better, here's why you'll live longer. These are the types of like check boxes that you'll have when you sit across from an elderly client. Now the big thing they talk about here in the book, and the reason why I have this highlighted is they talk about reduced body fat. And they give us example. If you do a 25-minute circuit of resistance training, and it's about 200 calories, for the exercise performed. If you look at that 3 times a week, you have 2,400 calories. And what they're talking about is it's this caloric balance that we have in terms of calories coming in, calories going out. Our body mass itself requires a certain amount of calories to function. And what you're trying to do is look at this in terms of, am I putting calories in the bank or am I taking calories out of the bank? If we have an increase in energy production and energy requirements, like they're noting here, 7%, where we're actually increasing the workloads, and we're going to go ahead and increase the workloads just on an incremental basis each day, you're going to burn another 3,000 calories a month. And over, and this is where the consistency in working out becomes so important, over the course of a month to a year, et cetera, if you look at how much that actually equates out to, then they note here, at least in this example, the sum of these resistance training and muscle remodeling energy expenditures, it's about 5,400 calories per month, which is equivalent to 1.4 pounds. Just so you know, a pound of fat is 3,500 calories. So now you start to look at this and go, okay, 3,500 calories, how can I either take 3,500 calories out of my diet per month, or how can I burn off maybe 1,500 calories and take 2,000 calories out of my diet, or how can I burn off 2,000 calories and take 1,500 calories out of my diet? It becomes a conversation of math with your clients to get them to understand this. Now on page 503, they talk about cardiovascular fitness. They talk about the health benefits of aerobic activity. They kind of summarize some of the health benefits that are associated with this. And they talk about some of the exercise recommendations themselves. And you're trying to have the body become better and more efficient at the transferability of oxygen across membranes from the alveoli in the lungs to the blood to the muscles, oxygen hops off, the CO2 hops on, and the CO2 goes back, hops into the alveoli, and they're able to blow that off. It's a matter of efficiency and being able to have an adaptation in the process that allows them to be more efficient. With resistance training guidelines, and I highlight this because you'll see it somewhere else, the position statement on resistance training for older adults recommends that older men and women progress to exercise resistances up to 85% of a 1 rep max for about 4 to 6 repetitions, which is appropriate. You might find 85% for 6 reps might be a little bit challenging. You might question if it's actually 85% or not, but that's another conversation for programming. But that's the recommendation, and you'll see it somewhere else. But they have these guidelines in here for selection, repetition and resistance, sets, and progression. And the NSCA position statement, they recommend that previously untrained older men and women initially perform a single set of each resistance exercise. And I can tell you, when you have new people come in who've never worked out before, and you get them on a piece of equipment, and they do one set on one piece of a selectorized, one piece on another set on another piece of selectorized, and you do one set on each piece of selectorized equipment, that will be taxing for somebody who is brand new to working out. And it's appropriate for them because you'll probably have them working at the recommended workloads to basically elicit a training response. A couple weeks down the road, it'll seem like a warm-up for them. But the single set can be very effective in introducing content, getting people acclimated to the gym environment, and then also allowing you to basically collect data on how your client is doing, how much weight they can press for how many repetitions, how's their technique. We're placing a little load on the system. You can start to evaluate in terms of their movement patterns, if they're asymmetrical or not. And so you can use that as a bit of a tool. And the progressions itself, they talk about a 2 for 2 rule. And the 2 for 2 rule is basically this. You train within a given resistance until the target number of repetitions that you have. Say it's 10. You can exceed that by 2 reps. So a person, instead of doing 10, they bang out 12 reps. And then the next time they come in, you prescribe, if you will, or you program in sets of 10, and yet again, they do sets of 12. So they've done 2 reps over the recommended amount for 2 consecutive workouts. That's when you raise the weight. I will tell you that the people who come in on the front end, because they're so deconditioned, there's such an opportunity there for them to have gains that you could almost expect that they're going to have gains. And I said it earlier in an earlier presentation, a lot of it is just as a result of them becoming more familiar with working out, but also from a neurological standpoint, becoming better or more capable and more efficient at recruiting the right muscles to make the movement happen. With resistance training itself, according to the position statement of resistance training, older adults should include some high-speed concentric muscle action using 40 to 60% of their estimated 1 rep max to promote muscle power development. So what they're saying is we're now talking about not only loading, but we're talking about the actual speed of the movement pattern itself. I do agree with this in terms of having a conversation regarding elasticity and plasticity of the muscles. Elasticity being very short-term changes in flexibility, and plasticity being more permanent. And so I'm on board with this, and I agree with it. You may have to manipulate the exercise range a little bit to make that happen. They do note the Valseva maneuver, which is a holding of the breath to create internal pressure to be able to push more weight. Use caution with that. And also, some of your clients, they may be on blood pressure medication. So as a result of holding the bar too hard, or perhaps gripping the handles on like the leg extension machine, it's that squeezing itself that ends up causing some lightheadedness and blackouts. With the 0 to 10 scale for physical exertion, moderate intensity, you should be at a 5 or a 6, and vigorous intensity would be a 7 or an 8. So you can kind of manipulate this when you work with your clients between 5 and 6 or 7 and 8 in terms of how hard you want to work your clients. And it's a little bit like you want them doing intense workloads to strain the system enough, but you want to be able to navigate where they are on a scale of 0 to 10, very much like an RPE, to understand if sets of 10 are going to put them at a 7 or 8, or if sets of 10 are going to have them at a 1 and 2, what you need to do for your client. When they do both moderate intensity aerobic activity and vigorous intensity, they need 40 minutes of walking on Mondays, and perhaps they can do 20 minutes of jogging on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and it's a combination of 120 minutes per week is what they note in the book. I'm going to leave this right here for a second. The book itself notes in Table 18.1, these are common conditions for adults. I'm going to stop there.